Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're talking about the power of nature as a healing modality. We all know that getting outside is healthy and beneficial, but do we really understand how time in nature benefits our brain and body, and why it's not just a nice to do, but really a need to do for us and our kids? I'm excited to devote our show today to this important topic, especially during this time of COVID, when I'm finding professionally and personally that kids are cooped up indoors more often than may even be typical, although we know that getting outside can be an issue for kids in general. So this is a really important thing for us to be discussing. Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller is here to talk with us about nature as big medicine. Let me tell you a bit about her. She is an OB-Gyn and integrative medicine physician who resides in Cedar Falls, Iowa. She's board certified by both the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the American Board of Integrative Medicine. She holds additional certifications in herbal medicine and is a certified forest therapy guide. She's served as medical director for the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy and currently is medical advisor for AllTrails. She's the award-winning author of The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing and A Friend Like John, Understanding Autism. She speaks nationally and internationally about autism, integrative medicine, and nature therapy. Suzanne and her husband, Joe, are avid outdoor enthusiasts and lead workshops combining outdoor adventure and the mindful practice of forest bathing. Suzanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here.
This is such a unique and compelling and fascinating topic. I am so excited to have you here. And I know that already I've said some terms that some listeners are like, wait, what did she say? Forest bathing?
Right. Yes.
So I'm excited to delve into this, but you have such an interesting background. Traditionally trained physician, now doing forest bathing, workshops. So I really would like to start by having you talk about how it is that a conventional OB-GYN physician sort of transitioned to an integrative physician, an herbalist, a forest therapy guide, a doctor who prescribes nature. Tell us how that path came about.
I would be happy to. It's actually a fairly long story, but I will distill the important points. I always say that my name is as complicated as my journey, and really that is the way it's gone. But who doesn't have a complicated journey?
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. So I guess the point is to learn from our journey and do what we can. But so I started my practice and career as an OB-GYN, traditional, pathway, doing all the school one after another, and started practicing in the early 2000s, and had a couple kids, discovered that my son had autism a little bit before he turned 3. And of course that has been a major factor in the trajectory of my life really going forward. So we dealt with his condition and obviously continue to. He'll be 20 in a couple of weeks. So time flies. Moving forward, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in 2008, and he was not a smoker, but that was one of those really major blows in life. So it was some of those questions especially that started my questions, asking questions about conventional medicine and what we could do to support people with conditions such as autism and lung cancer and all of these things. And also I had patients who were asking me questions about, for example, herbal remedies for their menopausal symptoms and things like that. And I just felt like there must be more to healing than conventional medicine, than pharmaceutical drugs and surgery. And really those were the only tools I had in my toolbox. And I felt this gnawing sense that there was more, but I had no idea how to access it. It just wasn't part of my medical training. So fast forward a little bit, 2010, I heard Dr. Andrew Weil speak at a conference, and that was one of my first aha moments that there really was something more. And people who have known me for decades, many people find it kind of funny that I would be at the place that I'm at now, thinking back to how conventionally minded I was 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And so really that's been something that I think is so important, that when we learn something different, that we are open-minded enough to consider the merits of these different things, and especially one thing that drew me to integrative medicine was that it is evidence-based. Everything that we study and learn about has science to support its use, and it's not just somebody's idea about something that might be a health remedy. And so that appealed to me, because I always say I was a scientist first and a conventional doctor first, and I don't like to throw science out.
Yeah.
So I, after learning about the fellowship in integrative medicine with Dr. Weil through the University of Arizona, I embarked on that path. With my husband's illness, I deferred for a while, but ultimately then started the fellowship in 2012 and completed it in January of 2014. So that was when my eyes were open to all of these other modalities, and honestly, the simple things that we need for our health, things like nutrition and exercise and stress management, these obvious things that we actually get very little teaching about and training about in medical school and residency. And then my eyes were open to environmental toxins, which I know you just had my good friend Ailey Cohen on the program, and her new book is so exciting, non-toxic, talking about these kinds of things. And that was something too that I had questions about. What are we doing in our environment that's contributing to things like autism and lung cancer that I maybe didn't know about from my conventional background? So again, I could go on and on and on, but these were some of the things that made me really start to look at things differently and want to know more. Of course, once I got into integrative medicine, I was fascinated with herbal medicine. I then studied for 2 more years with Dr. Tirone Lodog, who was one of the teachers in our program, and then discovered this notion of forest bathing in 2014. And it was after my husband passed away in 2012 that I was, reeling and trying to figure out what to do with my life and my grief and all of that. I found myself more and more drawn to being outdoors, especially at first things like trail running and mountain biking and really adventuresome kinds of things and adrenaline rush kinds of things. And I felt like I needed that for my personal healing. But then at some point, as you well know, I recognized the need for balance. And I've been a practitioner of yoga for many, many years. And so I had kind of that mind-body concept. And so although I was trying to balance yoga, meditation with all of my adventure pursuits, as I mentioned, I discovered this whole concept of forest bathing and thought, wow, this is something, there's something here that really appeals to me. I started exploring it with some patients and participants in workshops, and then decided to become certified as a forest therapy guide. And so I've done that, did serve as the medical director for the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, which is an international organization that certifies forest therapy guides. And we can talk more about what forest bathing is, I'm sure, in just a second. But yeah, that's kind of how I got here. And since that time, really over the past year or two, I've really gotten even further into the study of what it is in nature that contributes to our health, and done a lot of public speaking, as you mentioned, writing, and I really do feel called to teach about that and work in that regard. So I'll stop with that.
I always find it so interesting. I say this on so many episodes with the guests that come on, just the intersection of our personal and professional lives.
Absolutely.
And how things happen that may seem really negative or difficult or challenging at the time in our personal lives drive the focus of our career in a different direction and allow us to impact people in ways that we never anticipated. And so it never ceases to amaze me just how interesting the tapestry of our stories are and how they're woven together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And I think that goes for all of your listeners too, I'm sure. We all have these terrible experiences in life that we think we're never going to recover from. And yet someone once said, if you think of every good thing that's happened, it was probably precipitated by some bad thing or negative thing or terrible thing that you had to go through. And so it's true. And I think we have to be able to be pliable and flow with what happens in life and learn from the lessons that maybe for some reason are there for us.
Well, and it's interesting thinking about that because so many parents, both in the clinic and, in my online community, have said over the years that really their child being diagnosed with a neurodevelopmental issue, a mental health issue, something really was the impetus for change as a family that led them in a much better direction and
Absolutely.
led other family members to recognize some really, problematic things going on with them that they
Certainly.
were able to impact. So certainly, looking for those positives and those silver linings. So many things I want to ask you based on what you mentioned with your history and what you've been researching and learning about. But let's go back to this idea of forest bathing, because I
Yes.
know this may be a new term
Right.
for people, and they're wondering, tell me what that is. So what is forest bathing? Why is it helpful? How is it done? Give us all the details.
Right. Well, first of all, you do get to keep your clothes on in forest bathing. When I first started offering forest bathing walks back in 2015, 2016, yes, I had a lot of questions, and I did this through a retreat center and conservation nature centers around, and so they would publicize these things, and people would always call and ask all of these questions about what what is this? So yes, clothing is not optional. But forest bathing is translated from the Japanese Shinrin-yoku, and that term is not as ancient as one might think, but it was coined in the early 80s by some doctors in Japan who recognized that their patients were experiencing significant mental health problems, high incidence of depression and anxiety, and terribly high rates of suicide. And they wondered if the chaos of living in the city, the lights and sounds and stressful life of living in Tokyo was contributing to this mental health crisis. And so these doctors started taking their patients on excursions out into the forest about an hour outside of the city. And they did this intentionally. And and they studied things as they were doing it. It wasn't just like, okay, we're going on a field trip, have fun, enjoy. They took their patients out with the intention of guiding them to take nature in a mindful way through the various senses in a very quiet, solemn, contemplative way, with the goal of allowing people to really get out of that monkey mind stressful state and into more of a deeper, almost meditative, dreamlike state. We refer to that state in forest bathing as the liminal state. And it's similar to a dream, where things happen to our subconscious when we allow ourselves to go to that place. So as they took people out into nature in this way, they did some studies on them, of course, to see if this was impacting them in any way. And they would give them mental health questionnaires that they would do before and after these excursions. And they found consistently that people reported improvements in these various parameters of mental health: feelings of anxiety, feelings of tension, feelings of depression, feelings of self-esteem, and all of these different things. And found that just consistently these parameters were all improved after this forest bathing experience. They also did more objective data, took more objective data on things such as blood pressure and pulse, and something called heart rate variability, which looks at how stressed we are, looks at our sympathetic and our parasympathetic tone, which I think is something that's very, very fascinating. Sympathetic tone is that fight or flight response, as opposed to the parasympathetic tone, which is more of a rest and digest, rest and relaxation tone. So they looked at all of these things with people before and after forest bathing and found that they were improved as well. And then even further, they've looked at things like hormone levels in their participants' saliva, things like salivary cortisol and salivary alpha amylase. And those levels they have found improved after time spent in nature in this quiet way. So it's really interesting. I think the research out of Japan from this practice has been very compelling. Another interesting fact about their research that I think pertains to this time of a pandemic, when everybody's looking for things to strengthen the immune system, these doctors found that after a forest bathing excursion, and the study that they have published is a 3-day, 2-night excursion. So that's more than, a walk that I typically would do that would take place over 2 or 3 hours, but still would not be unlike perhaps a weekend camping trip or something. But they found that in coming in contact with chemicals that are emitted from the trees, chemicals known as phytoncides, that people had increased levels of natural killer cells in the body after forest bathing. And natural killer cells, or NK cells, are cells that sweep through the body and gobble up viruses and bacteria and even cancer cells as they're developing. So they found that these NK cells were elevated in both number and level of activity after these excursions of forest bathing. They found that that was true immediately after the experience, and then found that it was true 7 days out and even 30 days out.
Wow.
So to me, that is astounding, that spending a weekend in the forest and just inhaling these chemicals and the essential oils from trees, particularly evergreen trees, that you would have that kind of health benefit and boost to your immune system and perhaps even fight cancer. I mean, who knew, huh?
It's amazing. And this is the science of it that I think is so important. In the intro to the show, I said, we tend to think of it as a nice to do, like, oh yeah, we should do that, but we don't really understand why it's so valuable and so important. And I think over time, as we have become more focused on spending more time indoors, and now especially more than ever before in front of screens, and we already know that this generation of kids is the most sedentary than ever before in history, and they're not being sedentary sitting out in nature. They're being sedentary on their couches, their bed, their floor, whatever, with devices. And now the pandemic has really, escalated that even more. And it's like we're losing all of the benefits that come to us physically and mentally of being in nature. And it's sort of a slippery slope. Like, I don't think anyone intended for it to happen, but from the time that you and I were kids and the amount of time that we spent outside to now our children, and, it's really shifted, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's been an insidious occurrence, this technology thing. First it was TV, and now it's the devices that we're all attached to. And I mean, my daughter right now is doing school via technology. And I think now, as more than ever before, it's important to acknowledge the critical importance of being outdoors. And it's not just a nice thing. There really are health benefits to being outside.
I want to get into that a little bit more in terms of the benefit on mental health and physical health. And you touched on some of that. We were talking about like the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is, so concisely explained, that sympathetic, that more fight or flight, that worked up, that edgy, that, kind of anxious tone. And then that parasympathetic, more relaxed, calm, able to take things in. It makes me think about so many of our kids, especially kids who have autism, more severe ADHD, more significant mental health kinds of issues, certainly kids with anxiety, and how much of the time I can tell, even like in the clinic or just out in public, I look at kids and I can visibly see them in this sympathetic nervous system overdrive. Like you can just see the tension in their body, in their face, the hypervigilance. That's so damaging on so many levels for our kids, physically as well as mentally, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not good for our brains to be constantly frazzled. That can, it's such a vicious cycle. I talk about this a lot also with patients, that, if you're constantly in that state of chaos and anxiety and stress, that means you're not sleeping well at night. If you're not sleeping well at night, your brain cannot cleanse the toxins that are floating around. You can't possibly think well. You can't possibly have a day the next day that's productive. And it just is this constant vicious cycle. As with all the things that I'm sure you and I both talk about with patients with nutrition and things, but my son, as I mentioned, is almost 20 and has autism. He was in a university program, certificate program for job preparedness and things. And this year he's taking a gap year because of COVID. And so he's home again.
Mm-hmm.
And this is stressful. Everything about it is stressful. And so I can see when it's rising, and I'll say, maybe you should go take a walk. And he has this little circuit that he does daily. And you can tell how stressed and how overworked his mind is by how long his walk ends up being.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great barometer of that.
Right. But he's able to express that and quantify that and connect that that's what he needs to do when he feels that way. And I'm just so thankful that even though there are so many things he's missing out on right now, that's something that he can access any day, anytime, and it's free. And it's one of the best things he could possibly do for himself.
I love that you mentioned that, because I think this is a strategy or a tool that we can all apply with our kids, no matter their age, no matter the severity of their, disability or their developmental level, their functioning level. Everybody can get outdoors and benefit from that, even if they don't have great motor skills and aren't able to walk outside. Just being outside, right? This is something that we can apply to everybody.
Yes, I could not agree more. And that's such an important point right now because of COVID, and in terms of people who might have either intellectual disabilities or mobility issues or whatever it is, that if you can't get out and take a walk, or you can't get out to the woods and forest bathe, can you derive benefits from nature in close to home methods? And that's something I've been exploring personally quite a bit during COVID, is this idea of nearby nature. And I think there is a ton to be said for just that. And as I'm talking to you, I'm sitting on my deck because it's still fortunately nice enough outside to do so. But where I'm sitting, I have some trees that are in my yard and some tomato plants that are getting tired and some potted plants and some things like that that I can gaze at. And even if that was all I had, there's tremendous benefit in being able to do that. We have this practice in forest bathing called sit spot. And sit spot is this idea of taking just 20 minutes to sit outdoors and just notice what you notice. And if I could give one prescription to everybody universally, regardless of your age or your ability level or your health, it would be to take a 20-minute sit spot.
I love it.
And you can do this in the most beautiful places. You can do it in a national park if you have access to that. You can do it in a local park. You can do it in your backyard. You can do it on a balcony with a potted plant. You can do it looking out your window. You can do it on a sidewalk with a dandelion. You can do it in your house with a potted houseplant. And I have done it with all of these different things. And it works. And I'm always really, really amazed that I could have an experience that improves my health. And I've done my own little experiments, checked my heart rate or my heart rate variability, or just kind of mentally scanned or done a body scan before and after sitting with a potted plant for 20 minutes. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And I noticed that I feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. So great that there really there aren't barriers to this. Like, probably when people originally think like forest bathing, thinking, oh, that sounds like planning this trip,
exotic and big and expensive and
right. No, you're saying you can do it with a potted plant. And I would, assume from what you're talking about that with a child who maybe is developmentally younger or isn't used to engaging in mindful, quieter activities, that maybe we would start with 60 seconds of
of course,
sitting in the yard and taking in nature, and we could work up, right?
Absolutely. And I think that certainly this can be adapted to any level of attention span. There was a study in 2018 that looked at college students and separating themselves from their devices, being outside in nature for 5 minutes, and found that 5 minutes of time disconnected from devices improved nearly all parameters of mental health. Just 5 minutes.
Wow.
So then the researchers decided to increase the length of time in that study to 15 minutes to see if there were, better gains if you were sitting out there longer. And they found that there really was no improvement when adding 10 more minutes. So 5 minutes. We all have 5 minutes. I guarantee almost all of your listeners probably spend at least 5 minutes messing around on their devices or social media in a day. Right. So I'm all about the no excuses.
Right. No, but I think that's great because we, as humans, we're very good at coming up with reasons why we can't do things, right? And you're basically dismantling all of those from the start and saying, look, the research shows even 5 minutes is helpful. Right. And I really, that makes me think about something I've been recommending and preaching about so much in the last 6 months with the online learning, which is that kids need to be taking breaks. And so, I was just talking to a teen yesterday, an 11th grader, and saying, look, when your 15-minute lecture or class is done, you need to close the computer, put the phone away, and go outside for 5 minutes and just be there, get the fresh air, move around a little bit. And so to hear you saying that actually that 5 minutes can have some really positive effects, that's so important for parents to tune into.
Exactly. A 5-minute break can do wonders for just resetting your brain and your body and your well-being and your mental health, if nothing else.
Yeah. So it's interesting because for so many years, I mean, we're blessed here at our clinic. We have quite a large property. We have nature, outside. So I have the opportunity to take kids, and adults I work with outside. And some days I'll just tell, like, somebody will come in and it's like, if the weather's decent and we're not going to get soaked or frozen during our session, I'll say, let's go sit on the deck just for a little bit right now.
Oh, I do that too.
Let's walk around. Like, let's just walk around the yard and not even talk. Like, especially kids coming in totally fried from the school day. It's like they have the 4 p.m. appointment slot, which is like just the worst for a kid, right? And it's like, let's just spend 5 or 10 minutes at the start of our appointment. Like, we're just not even going to talk. We're just going to walk around the yard together, or we're just going to, plunk down and sit right in the grass together. And it's always intuitively struck me just that that's effective for helping kids to reset. And so it's helpful to hear what you're talking about of connecting the research to that.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. I've done the same. For years, I've taken patients outside and walked and talked, or, it's very helpful. It's great to hear that you're doing that.
Yeah. And I think the other piece that is striking about this is something that families can do together, and receive benefits. It's simple. You and your child can go out and take a walk. You're both going to have the benefits. And certainly as parents, more than ever, we can benefit from these physiological and mental health, improvements that you're talking about. Absolutely. Us making the time to be outside.
That's right. Get outside, go for a walk, go to a playground, whatever it is, everyone's going to have some benefits from it. I quote one particular study a lot, especially when it comes to talking about kids. And that was a study that found that spending an hour in nature improves memory and attention span by 20%. And the benefits are there even if they didn't enjoy it.
That's a really good one.
Isn't that the best? I was thinking about that study before we started today, thinking I need to be sure to mention that, because your audience of all people that I talk to can resonate with that idea of, my husband and I often drag our kids. We have 5 teenagers between us, so you can imagine how sometimes they don't love the things we make them do.
Oh yes.
Usually outdoors. And I quote that constantly. It turns out that you're getting benefits whether you like it or not. So
that is really important to know, because a lot of parents are probably saying, my kid doesn't like to be outside or it's a hassle. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Right. It's no
They
different
don't
than
have
eating
to
your
like it.
peas.
Yes, right. No, I love that. It makes me think about, because one of the things that came to my mind when you said they don't have to like it is um, the issue of when the weather starts to
Yes.
turn, right? So you and
Right.
I both live in the Midwest. We were talking before we started the interview
Mhm.
about we are in the last stretch of good weather right now. And then we're going to embark on our 6-month period of time where it is anywhere from chilly to downright freezing. You know, we get snow, it's grayer. Suggestions, tips, thoughts about still the importance of getting kids outside when the weather's
Right.
not ideal?
Yes, I mean, definitely. My husband and I often will say, there's no bad weather, only poor clothing choices.
I love
Um,
it.
and, yes, if you live in the Midwest, you probably have to invest in some good clothing. And that's really the bottom line. It doesn't have to be expensive clothing, but it has to be warm enough and dry enough that you can be outside. And I think that is one of the most important things. I know it saves me in the winter to be able to get outside, and I have to be physically active and I have to get outdoors or I really fall apart, regardless of the weather. And so we do everything we can during the winter. We hike, we snowshoe, we cross country ski, we ride our fat bikes in the snow, and we just do it. And I think that is one of the most important things that children today can be allowed and encouraged to do. And you and I both said that as children, we were sent out to play. I was bundled up in my snowsuit and sent out to play. I
Oh,
was stuck in my rain jacket and rain boots and a
mhm.
umbrella and told to go play. And I think kids do so much less of that, and it's one of the most important things that they can do, even if it's 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think for parents to hear that the weather doesn't have to be ideal, and kids might squawk about it, but they do get into the habit of, okay, I have to do this. And some of you have kids who want to go out no matter what the weather, and you may be holding back like, oh, I don't really
Right.
want to go out with you or whatever. But if your child is indicating that they need to do this, if they want to do this, we need to
Yes.
support that, because
Oh my gosh,
I find
yes.
so often, especially our kids with autism or other neurodevelopmental issues, they intuitively know what's good for them and what they need.
Right.
And those kids
Yes.
who are constantly clamoring to get outside, they're
Let
telling us,
them.
my body needs this. My
So
brain needs
true.
to be in nature right now.
That's very interesting. Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I thought I had a thought and now it just escaped me. So go on.
But I love what you were saying earlier about your son now at age 20, because these habits have been built. He's able to really use that. First of all, he's developed self-awareness about
Right.
how it helps him. And so, the more worked up I am, the longer a walk I take. What
Right.
an amazing and powerful gift to give our kids, whether they have autism or
Yes.
another issue or not, to by the time they grow into adulthood, to have that awareness, right?
Right.
And to go, I
Oh,
can use this
so
as a
true.
tool. I just think that's a profound gift to give them.
Yeah. I think so too. And I've worked on that with a number of different things with him over the years. I often say I am guessing he's one of the only kids who has ever had yoga breathing written into his IEP, because I made my poor child do yoga when he was a kid, and it was very good for self-regulation. And, I've constantly said eating these vegetables are good for your brain and they're good for your health, and he'll still say those things to this day. So those things become ingrained in our kids when we equate positive behaviors with healthy outcomes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's just so important to recognize that the earlier we can start that, the more that builds. But even no matter what the age of your child, if you're parenting a young adult child right now, work on this now. Open
Right.
your eyes to the fact that this can be a tool. And I think that's one of the pieces there, especially if you have a child who's resistive. We need to be a model and do it with, right? At
Right.
least that's what I find initially. If you have a child who's resistive to it, we need to go first. They need to
Sure.
see us getting outside and doing it with them, as opposed to just
Yes.
saying, you should go do this.
Absolutely. I've always felt that it was important to lead by example, and I never suggest to my patients or my kids that they do something that I don't do and
Right.
believe is important. And so that's why I've spent time. Oh, I know what I was going to say before when I forgot. forest bathing with people, or doing walk with a doc with my patients, or teaching cooking classes and things. What I was going to say before is, on the subject of inclement weather, some of the most profound experiences I've had with people when I've taken them out on guided forest bathing walks are when the weather has been drizzly, or, some kind of not perfect weather, to the point where people will have said, oh, I thought I maybe would cancel or not come because it was drizzling a little, or it was colder than I wanted, or whatever. And then afterwards they'll say, that was absolutely magical. And I've had people come up to me even recently from a walk my husband and I did a couple of years ago, where it poured for the entire 2.5 hours. We thought it was going to rain a little at the beginning, so we proceeded. And then it poured for 2.5 hours. And after that, people said, that was actually very empowering. I didn't realize I could be outside in the rain, that I could enjoy myself in the rain, that it could feel so good to just be out in the rain. And now I go out in the rain all the time. It doesn't stop me from going for a walk or going for a run. It's just, it just is. So it was really something, and that was a kind of eye opener for me too, that, wow. I mean, because again, we go outdoors in crazy weather all the time, but how rare that is for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that. That made me think, with COVID and everything that's going on, I know you had mentioned to me before the interview, there's some virtual forest bathing, or some things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Things that people might be able to find online?
Yeah, there are virtual forest bathing walks, if you can believe that. People can go to my website for links, which is integrativeinitiative.com. There's the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy website, where people can find virtual tours, virtual guided walks all the time. And, I've put some on social media that I've done. I'm working on filming some little 5-minute snippets of kind of forest bathing that we're going to start offering on social media. So these things are out there where you can even be indoors and potentially experience some of this.
Yeah, that's great, especially as, we've all had to get creative during this time, especially of how do we make therapeutic experiences accessible to people with everything that's going on. So I love that. That's great. I want, as we're wrapping up here, I want you to tell people the name of your website again, because you've got so many great resources there. And also you've got a couple books too.
I do. Yeah. Thank you. So again, my website is integrativeinitiative.com. And I do have some blogs on there. There's a link to a recent webinar that I just co-created with some other nature-minded physicians and researchers that anyone can watch. If you felt like some of this science really gets your juices flowing, it is chock full of the science of nature and health. It's for anyone to watch. It's free. There is 1 hour of continuing medical education credit available for medical and healthcare providers, if that's of interest. And that's all located on my website. On social media, Facebook, I'm Integrative Initiative. And then on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Doc Suzy, S-U-Z-Y.
And great stuff on there. I've enjoyed taking a look at what you have on social media and on your website. And then you also have your book, The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so that was a fun experience. It's published by Falcon Guides and came out last year in 2019. So it combines outdoor adventure, so trail running, hiking, mountain biking, cross-country skiing, climbing, paddling, with these elements of forest bathing. And there are invitations for people to actually go through as they're out in nature. It could either be done by reading it, or there's an audiobook version as well. I incorporated quite a bit of this science of nature into it as well. Did some interviews with elite athletes and the ways that they incorporate nature into their practice. And then also incorporated some herbal medicine into it, because we typically end our forest bathing walks with a tea ceremony in Japanese fashion, which aligns with my love of herbal medicine. And so we try to use a plant that's native to the area and incorporate it into a tea. And I find that people really love to learn this, that you could use a dandelion, for example, something that probably everybody could recognize, and that there are medicinal properties to a dandelion, and you can make a tea out of it. it that actually tastes good. So yes, all of these things are incorporated in the book.
Right. And how about
And also the autism book. I didn't write.
Yes, I was
Yes, you're
gonna say,
right.
just to
Yeah,
comment
yeah,
on
yeah.
that, because I know many of our listeners, you know, if they have a
Right.
child
Yes,
with
thank you.
autism, would want to know about that.
Well, that book I published in 2011. I self-published that through Author House. It's called A Friend Like John, Understanding Autism. And I created it because every year from the time that John was in kindergarten, my son, I would go to his class and we would talk about autism. I wanted it to be very transparent. I just wanted the kids to have the opportunity to ask me questions about why John did some of the things he did. And then we talked a lot about ways that John was also just like them. And it just always felt like such a positive thing where, he started learning to play the trombone when he was 7, for example, and the other kids were blown away when they discovered this. So we could kind of showcase some of his strengths and talk about, well, you don't like it when somebody screams in your ear, right? And so maybe these loud sounds are troublesome to John in the same way that they might bother you. And so the book kind of evolved from that, just this idea of looking at similarities and differences and being able to talk about it freely.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Awesome. And it's great. I had seen that book and knew about that book before I knew who you were.
Really?
And so putting the two together is wonderful. And I really encourage people to, now those are both available on your website or on Amazon or?
They're both available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and through the publishing companies.
Cool.
So, yep, they're just out there.
Good. Highly encourage people to check those out. If you were to leave parents with one simple takeaway, something that they can start doing right away based on the conversation today, what would it be?
Right. I mean, it's just to take the time, know that it is the best thing you can do for yourself and also for your children, to take even 5 minutes, 20 minutes if you can, to just take some time disconnected from devices outdoors, whether it's in your own backyard or at a park or anywhere that there's just a little bit of nature. Just know that it really is good for you. Doctor's orders.
I love it. Fantastic. Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller, thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I know our listeners did too and took so much from it. So thank you so much for being here.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We will catch you back here next week for our next episode of the Better Behavior Show.